Absolutely. Both players have an 8-1 record going into this game. This is round 10. So let's see who ends up going 9-1. That is quite the record to achieve.
We see a hand here for Kvartek. You know, it's a pretty standard, I'd say, Goblin's hand. You know, he's playing Rakdos Goblins. He's got the Splash for Thoughtseize in the main deck, but he's off to a good start there with Conspicuous Snoop and revealing a Muxus. So that means everybody knows, well, he's seeing a Muxus, knowing that everyone knows that that's coming. Excuse me. On the other side of things, though, I think most importantly here for Salvatto is I'd say this is the key card in the matchup for him, which is a copy of Dreadheart Arcanist. This kind of really just gets everything going with regards to Thoughtseize and Village Rites, so he's got to be happy about that. Though I will say, like in the Firstborn, he's got some other plans here, clearly.
Yeah, making use of these spells early, they can be recast later with Dreadheart Arcanist, but this is a great way to get that Snoop off the board, stealing it, swinging with it, and sacrificing it for some card draw.
Yeah, that's not a bad start at all there for Salvato, getting the Snoop off of the battlefield. Here comes a Goblin Matron now for Kvartek. Again, with this Goblin deck, you have a walking Demonic Tutor for Goblins. We've seen this play already a ton so far this week in Amy of just, you know what, go get a Muxus. Even if I have one in my hand, go get a Muxus. Make sure I can cast a Muxus.
Seeing a trade here. It's better to have that Cleric in the graveyard than on the battlefield, because once it gets brought back, it becomes a 5/5 flying demon. It's amazing that that got stapled onto a 1-drop.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly pushed that Archfiend, that's for sure. Speaking of push cards, here is arguably the most powerful discard spell in Magic's history in Thoughtseize. Definitely a key component to this deck here for Salvato, and a huge addition from Amonkhet Remastered. In combination with Dreadheart Arcanist, it is really one of the engines of this deck. Now, if you are Salvato, you know the hand. You know that there are Muxuses, plural, over there. You know, you don't know how far away your opponent is from casting it, but we know that Kvartek did draw a Dragon Skull Summit, so only needs one more land to get this party started.
Here comes Kroxa going to force a discard. Do you choose the land, which helps line you up for Muxus, or do you choose the spare Muxus? And it looks like Muxus is going to the graveyard.
Well, this is the big difficulty there if you're Kvartek, which is you know your opponent has a Thoughtseize in the graveyard, so realistically, if you discard the land, they're going to Thoughtseize you with the Dreadheart Arcanist trigger, most likely. Of course, there's also Village Rites in the graveyard, but here comes the recast Thoughtseize from Salvato. So if you discard the land and you leave 2 Muxuses, you're going to leave a Muxus left in your hand, and then you're 2 lands away from actually being able to do anything with Muxus. So that's really a rock and a hard place. Now, drawing running lands here for Kvartek is nice insofar as he does have land 6 from Muxus number 1, but now he's actually got to find a Muxus, and 2 are already in the graveyard.
With 50% of all Muxuses in the grave, that's going to be a hard draw to get. But there are more matrons, I believe, in the list. Or is this a... Yes, there are 3 Goblin matrons in this list. So there's definitely a good chance of encountering either naturally drawing the other Muxus or finding it with matron.
Yeah, and that's kind of the hope right now. If you're Kvartek, truth be told, you know, if we could hear his inner monologue, I'm sure he's thinking to himself, boy, I hope I draw Muxus next turn or the following turn or something like that. Because right now, this game is definitely getting away from him. We can see his hand. He's got a land. We can see his battlefield. It's lands and a Goblin Chieftain. There's not a lot going on here at all right now for Chris Kvartek, whereas on the other side of things for Luis Salvato, Bedevils, access to Luris soon here, taking a look at the graveyard right now is Salvato as well. So the world is kind of his oyster at this exact moment.
I agree. That is a great state to be in. And here comes, again, Kroxa, this time escaping from the graveyard. That is a 6/6 with a great entered battlefield ability, going to deal 3 damage, force that land out of the hand.
Yeah, this is horrible news, but this is, oh my gosh, he actually drew the Muxus.
Oh no, Muxus with 5 lands.
That's actually insane that he drew Muxus that turn. Good on you, Luis Salvato, for using that Kroxa last turn. And as we know, when Kroxa attacks, trigger, make you discard a card. So everything has lined up beautifully here this game for Luis Salvato. I said at the top how much he loves his deck in game number 1 against basically every deck in the format, and that is coming to fruition here in this game. It all lined up beautifully for our Rakdos Arcanist player.
And in response to claim the Firstborn, we're seeing a concession and going into sideboarding.
Unreal. And you know, you obviously see the plan every time with this Goblins deck, right? It's built around Muxus. It's built around, hey, I got to get this thing on the battlefield. It's my most powerful card, so on and so forth. So the plan is pretty straightforward. But for Kvartek, he had one in his hand. He searched for one for a little bit of redundancy with Goblin Matron, but he can never get it on the battlefield. And that's, again, some of the appeal of what Salvato is doing. It's that combination of Dreadhorde Arcanist plus Thoughtseize. You throw Kroxa into the mix, and you're constricting your opponent's resources, and they were never able, Kvartek in this instance, to cast that 6-mana spell.
And watching Kvartek do some sideboarding here, I'm seeing all copies of Braid come in and all copies of Thoughtseize come out. Seeing as the graveyard is pretty much a second hand to Luis's deck, it makes a lot of sense to get rid of Thoughtseize. You're pretty much hitting yourself for 2 damage for no great advantage.
Yeah, you're not getting a lot done with Thoughtseize in this particular matchup, so I like moving to the removal spells. A Braid can take care of Young Pyromancer, can take care of Dreadhorde Arcanist, and this is, I don't know if it's a better start, but it's definitely a good start here for Kvartek. It's a hand you're going to keep every time. You've got Prospector, you got Snoop, you got Matron and Krenko, and even a removal spell. So a lot to like here for Kvartek's opening hand.
Leading with a Stitcher Supplier, filling up the graveyard. Nothing that can get immediately recast. No claim to fames got thrown in the graveyard, but still a great way to start out any match with one of those 1-drops.
Well, you see the Snoop, top card of the deck there is
Krenko.
Yeah,
and we saw,
that's a nice one.
Do you see that upkeep stop that just got set?
I'd set it too.
Yep. So Chris Kvartek taking advantage of the pre-draw phase here during upkeep, tapping the Conspicuous Snoop, and getting the Krenko ability to generate 2 1/1 goblins.
Now, if you are rooting for Luis Salvato, here's a couple of things to keep in mind. One, you've got a copy of Witch's Vengeance to take care of these goblins, so it's not the end of the world. But two, as we will find out here soon enough, Chris Kvartek does not have a land to play this turn. So for this member of the MPL, Chris Kvartek, it is bad news gobos here for him with regards to lands.
Thankfully, that Skirk Prospector kind of acting like a mana source right here. Able to sacrifice those Krenko tokens that got generated. Conspicuous Snoop, I don't know how you thought you got to be Krenko, but I'm glad that you have the ability.
Well, this is interesting, right? Because you do have Skirk Prospector as a mana source, so you do have the ability to, play some cards here off the top of your deck with Snoop and do some unique and interesting things. And Kvartek is thinking about this insofar as, you know what, I do want to kind of get some creatures onto the battlefield, but I'm really, really just hoping that my opponent does not have Witch's Vengeance, which, well, Amy, I'm afraid I've got some bad news.
There's one in hand. We can see it. But you know what? That's the dramatic irony. We can see that Witch's Vengeance. We know that this is playing into a board wipe trap, and that sacrificing that Conspicuous Snoop will be to no avail. Maybe a little bit of extra damage in this turn. Nope, never mind. Just going to be a chump block with the Stitcher Supplier, filling up the graveyard even more, getting more fuel for the Dreadhorde Arcanist.
Yeah, so life is rather good here for Salvato. This play is about a straightforward town, which is this Witch's Vengeance. And we're going to see a response here from Kvartek, which does make some sense, which is I'm going to sacrifice a couple of goblins via the Prospector. They're going to die anyway for some red mana, use a Braid on the Arcanist, and really just hope that the follow-ups here for Salvato aren't that painful. And more importantly here for Kvartek, we need land number 3 for Goblin Matron number 1.
Oh yeah, right now, this is a struggle. All of these expensive goblins in hand and only 2 mana. A Braid, still a useful card to get off the top. It's going to be able to cut down any cards that enter the battlefield, but so many of these cards, if you get rid of them, they're in a graveyard and they can come back.
Stitcher Supplier, looks like we're going to add Luris to the grip right now. And for Chris, okay. He had to draw it, I think, that turn. I feel like if he didn't draw the 3rd land this turn, he was basically going to be out of this game. Now, Skirk Prospector is a good place to start. Again, it is a mana engine. He's behind on lands a little bit here. So starting there makes a lot of sense. If I'm Kvartek, I'm hoping to draw running lands and ideally get a Krenko going and then work myself into somehow, some way a Muxus this game. So we got to kick it off with another land here, but Skirk Prospector is not a bad place to start.
And now I think we're going to see a big Dreadhorde Arcanist replay, and that Dreadhorde Arcanist, once it can attack, has a pick of the litter when it comes to spells it can recast. We're going to see the 1 copy of Luris killed. Makes sense. That is the only card that cannot bring itself back from the graveyard, because you can only have 1 copy in the deck.
Yeah, very, very key to get that off of the battlefield. at this time, Luris is going to generate what I would consider to be an insurmountable advantage, especially while Kvartek is stumbling and fumbling around in this game. Now, it's not all over for Chris here. Again, 2 copies of Krenko in hand, one of which Salvato does know about, means that this game isn't over, but it is slipping away. So you got to get that Luris off of the battlefield right away, which Kvartek did do. And again, it's about drawing lands in this situation, which he has not been too successful at thus far in this game.
Drawing lands, an important skill to have. We're seeing Spark Harvest sacrificing Stitcher's Supplier, aiming for that Skirk Prospector, trying to kill that, get it off the battlefield, and really hinder Chris's mana base.
Yep, makes a lot of sense to me, especially when you have Dreadhorde Arcanist going. I don't want to call it a freebie, of course, but it feels pretty free a decent amount of the time. So now the Arcanist is going to come in, see what Salvato wants to get back. It looks like it's probably just going to be a Thoughtseize. Yeah, let's get an idea of what Kvartek is working with. See if you can poke a hole in this hand of Snoop, Double Krenko, and Goblin Matron.
Those Thoughtseizes, always nice to see, can interrupt a curve any day. A lot of the choice for this Thoughtseize is going to come down to, do you think Chris is going to draw a land next turn?
Yeah, I think it does. And to Salvato's credit, I don't think he's that actually scared of Krenko at this time. I don't think he's really all that scared of anything in that hand. I think if you're Salvato, it's worth thinking things over a little bit and consulting your graveyard and really kind of planning a couple of turns ahead with what you want to take with this Thoughtseize and figuring out where this game is going to go if my opponent does draw a land or if they don't draw a land.
And it's Conspicuous Snoop going to the graveyard. And here's Archfiend's Vessel, the 1/1 cleric that, if it comes back from the grave, gets bigger, stronger, flyinger. And Goblin Matron again. These draws are rough. There is a Muxus in hand, but the ability to cast it is not there. I'm guessing there's going to be a Skirk Prospector grabbed because that's going to line up for a potential Muxus cast on a land draw.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. So you can get Prospector here, and if you do get the Prospector, yeah, so you play that, you sack the 3 goblins. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's the highest ceiling play, which is you peel a land, you cast your Prospector, you sacrifice your 3 goblins, and you tap those 3 untapped lands and fire away. I don't know if that's wishful thinking or not, but in a situation like this where you're having difficulty, wishful thinking is something you may need.
Dreadhorde Arcanist swinging in for that recast on Village Rites, putting the... I like how they also attacked. He also chose to attack with the Cleric there. Just sacrificing it, but still had to get in the swing on Archfiend's Vessel.
Well, some of us are a fan of the attack all button. Okay,
it's easier, or you can press the spacebar twice if you're looking for a real shortcut.
So this play is really, really interesting here from Kvartek because he has 4 mana. So Salvato knows that he drew a 4th land, right? And he also knows he has 2 Krenkos. And a player of Luis's skill is probably going to be able to deduce that, wait a minute, you drew your 4th land and you're playing your Skirk Prospector. I'm probably going to want to respond with an Abrade. And I'm a little surprised that he didn't respond with an Abrade here because now we're going to get to see a Muxus hit the battlefield. I know that Abrade was only going to be a temporary solution, but now here comes Muxus. We know how good this can be. We're going to spin the RNG wheel, huh?
Oh, and it was a good spin indeed. 2 haste enablers and a wily goblin. Really filling up this board and getting so much damage for this turn.
That is a nice Muxus. Killing Chieftain makes a lot of sense here, but as you mentioned, haste is going to work itself into the equation. That was a good Muxus, folks. That's what we came to see when you're watching Goblins. Now, Kvartek is getting himself back into this game. Remember, this is part of the appeal of Goblins, as Kvartek was stumbling and fumbling around, missing land drop after land drop. Look where he's at now as we work ourselves in the late game. And more importantly, take a look at Salvato's hand. Stinky.
Oh yeah, Luis Salvato sitting on 2 swamps here. Not great against this board. And of course, there's a cost reduction effect right now happening with the War Chief, which means that those Krenkos are only going to cost 3 mana, so a top-to-deck, maybe 2-drop Goblin could come down as well.
Well, you see Luis Salvato sit up in his chair a little bit. He's thinking, okay, finally I found some freaking action. I was missing action. That was the big thing I was missing. So, here's a Kroxa. And we got the ability to play that, rebuy it from the graveyard. You mentioned those Krenkos, plural. Well, they're both gone now because of Kroxa. Almost assuredly, I think we're going to escape this. Yes, we are. So, bye-bye Krenkos. Huge draw there. And now, oddly enough, even though we just saw Muxus resolve, Chris Kvartek kind of needs a top deck now.
And that magma spray on the War Chief, having the haste enablers gone is very, very important, because if one of those Krenkos had hit the battlefield, or if another Krenko got drawn, it would be immediately able to tap, generate a bunch of goblins, and pump up Muxus to a near lethal level.
That was an absolutely enormous top deck there for Luis Salvatto. I mean, you mentioned it with the Krenkos and having haste and everything else. I mean, that would have just been probably game over. I don't know. I honestly do think that Kroxa was probably the best card that could have been drawn there, because not only does it take care of both Krenkos, but it's also a 6/6 on the battlefield, which brick walls the Muxus. And now you can actually start attacking and do some busted stuff here.
But this is about to be game, because we're seeing Claim to Fame on the demon from the Archfiend's Vessel. Kroxa, when it attacks, forcing 3 damage. And I think that Dreadhorde Arcanist might be able to remove the potential of blockers here.
I think it can remove one. I don't think it can remove both, given the tools that are in the graveyard. So either way, this is a really, really good 2-turn sequence here for Luis Salvatto. That Kroxa and the fact that it had last turn, and that draw of Claim/Fame, getting the 5/5 demon on the battlefield with the claim portion, and now giving it +2/+0 in haste. So that's back-to-back fantastic draws, and Kvartek's he's gonna need to draw one just as good next turn.
And here comes the swing. Dreadhorde Arcanist bringing back Claim the Firstborn, grabbing that goblin, the wily goblin there, forcing Muxus to block Kroxa. That's 8 damage to face.
Well, we know what our goblin player needs to draw. They got 6 mana. That ain't it. What?
Oh, that's a snoop, but it's a land on top.
Yes.
Oh no. Looks like Luis Salvatto with a clean 2-0 in this match.
Huge top decks there for Salvatto. You know, that was a game that almost got away from him in a very meaningful way once that Muxus was able to resolve. Fortunately for Luis, did find a copy of Kroxa.